to us is the one that matters to you. And whether you're focused on the journey or the destination, we'll be right there beside you to help make sure you can enjoy every mile and every moment. Because the only goal that matters to us is yours, truly.
Okay, we're going to get started. As you guys all know, this is Cydni Tetro. We're so excited to have you here with us today. And most of you must know that she is the CEO of Brandless and co-founder of the Women's Tech Council. And before we even get started, I'm going to kind of give a little more background of the different places that you have worked or worked with in the past, so you guys have a little pedigree from her, knowing you are one of the most visible women, obviously, in business and technology in this community here. So you've been or worked with Disney, DreamWorks, Facebook, Marvel, Microsoft, the MLB, the NFL, Target, Walmart, and many others. Those are obviously some big names that we can all recognize. And let's just kick right off by having you share a little bit of your journey to how you got to Brandless last December.
Yeah, I'd love to do that. And thanks for having me. I'm super excited to have this conversation because there's so many cool things happening, and I really love what we're doing at Brandless. So maybe just a quick overview or a couple sentences about what Brandless is. So Brandless is the fastest growing omni-channel direct-to-consumer platform. And we really think about it as how do you help people take better care of themselves and their families and the planet. So we have this really strong mission-driven mindset for how do we just make that possible for you to do better and create a strong impact and create a platform that allows the reach of that impact to be really broad. So the reason that's important to understand is my journey of getting into Brandless. So there's a couple of things that have always been woven through my entire career that I care a lot about. So one of those is being mission-driven. For me as an individual, really having an anchor in how do you make an impact has always been really important to me. Whether it was creating the Women Tech Council or in businesses that I've started, this idea that you as an individual should use your talents and your skills to make everything around you better, I really believe in. So for me, that's a foundational element. And then technology's always been at my core. I'm a computer scientist from my schooling, and I've always cared deeply about what technology means and how it transforms the opportunities that are in front of us. Because I think technology transforms everything. It transforms how we engage with people. It transforms what we have today in customer experiences, how we shop. Every part of our world is really transformed by technology, and it enables amazing things. So I care deeply about what technology means. And then I care also a lot about customer experiences. My entire career has been about how do you create magical, my Disney days, transformative experiences that allow you to bring customers into what you're doing and love what you're doing so much that they want to be part of your ecosystem. And it doesn't matter if you're Disney or any other company, customers matter. They are the foundation of what you build, and you want them to be a powerful part of that. So building experiences where customers love you and they're part of that constant journey. And then there's this kind of fourth stack for me that is, I ultimately call them deals, but I think about how do you broaden your impact by creating relationships, whether that's strategic, whether that's customer relationships, or whether that's fundraising. Because the more people you have around you that are helping you do better, the faster you can create stronger impact. And for me, those kind of four things have always been the essence of who I am, and Brandless represents those things. The core of who it is, it's mission-driven, we're doing technology transformation, we're focused on the customer, and then we're accelerating all of the impact of those things by creating an infrastructure, bringing like-minded brands together. And it was kind of this perfect ecosystem of things that I care a lot about and that represent me and the impact that we could have.
I love all of that, and I want to know even more about how you got connected last December. So what made this transition make so much sense to you, aside from obviously the mission, the vision of the company?
That's a really great question. One of the things I've been very aware of as I've built my career is the network and the ecosystem that you build over time, right? And the people that you interact with and you connect with. And I'm a firm believer that as you build connections, you will most likely run into those people at another stage in your career. I mean, you were having this experience just a second ago, right? Connecting with someone from previous. And so when you build networks, what happens is at the right time, opportunities come and find themselves. So we'd finished a transaction on a company last summer, and I was trying to figure out what to do with my life. I'm like, I don't know, what is that next stage? Where should I go? And at the same time, a private equity firm had decided to acquire Brandless and move its headquarters here to Silicon Slopes because of really the great ecosystem we had. And through my entire network, I got connected with them at the exact right time where they were exploring this new kind of evolution and they needed leadership to take them in. So I had an opportunity to connect with that and saw what we could build, and I jumped in.
And things fell into place.
And things fell into place.
Amazing things we're going to hear a little bit more about as we continue this discussion. Let's take a pause for a second because not all companies get a second chance. Brandless was in San Francisco, and this has kind of been a rebirth for them. Can you walk us through what they are going to do differently to make sure that everything's successful this time?
Yeah, one of the cool things about Brandless is that it was built around this idea of how do you create a mission-driven purpose, really transform direct-to-consumer, and create an active community of millions of people who are trying to really focus on better for you. And it received a bunch of funding, and that entire validation in business was really validated by SoftBank out of California. And we really view that as phase one. And for all sorts of reasons, not because the opportunity wasn't validated. So there was really clear validation on what that opportunity looked like. It's just a series of things that happened that allowed its ownership to transform to a different set of ownership. And the Clark Capital team, they're actually based here in Utah and Silicon Slopes. They're really experts in CPG. So consumer product goods, that's their space. And they have taken a number of companies from millions to billions and then into their next transaction. And that is their specialty. And so when they saw what was happening with Brandless, they looked at that and said, we can take what has been validated by that, this community of millions of customers that are very active, and allow that to transform and to really reach its full mission. Moved it here to Silicon Slopes. And then as I came in, it was this opportunity to really elevate that mission and accelerate its impact. And so we've really focused on accomplishing that in two ways. And so we think about it very broadly as how do you democratize access through technology to this better for you category? And the ways that we think you accelerate it happen with acquiring like-minded mission-driven brands so that you can create the reach of that and drive this curation for the community. And then secondarily, use technology to truly scale that. Because what's happening in direct-to-consumer is the individual is becoming the platform. Like you as an individual, you're the person who influences everyone around you and what they do. And so we view that as a very core part of what we're building. And so for Brandless, and it's not very often you can have an opportunity where you have such strong validation, millions of customers, and a community that you can immediately activate to fulfill the mission. And that's what's really unique about what we're doing and its ability to really quickly scale.
Can you give us an example of some of the products at Brandless?
Yeah, absolutely. So what's really cool about Brandless is it is not category specific. It's about how do you create this better for you experience, help people take better care of themselves across all categories, and really create innovation in each one of those. I'll give you a couple of examples. One of the things that I think represents it so well is there's an entire innovation around tree-free. So we think a lot about what it means to take better care of things like all the way to the planet. And that tree-free line is made out of bamboo and sugarcane. And so I think it's really cool that you have this innovation that directly correlates to things that we care about. So there's lots of categories. We have innovation in the team happening on everything from wellness to clean beauty to what's happening, in your home. We think about it broadly as on your body, in your body, and around your home, and what those innovations are that are coming into this curated platform that make a difference. One of the other things that I often think about is we have an entire focus on, I'll call it inside of like the cleaning and allowing in your home to not have toxic chemicals and be able to have safe environments. But the cleaning lines also have this innovation underneath them that aligns with single-use plastic. So there's an entire focus. It's been accelerated through the pandemic of how do we really take better care of the planet. And so thinking about even products that you use in your home and how you don't actually rebuy plastic every time, but you think about refillables and you think about them as packets that dissolve so that you don't actually have to have large bottles and you're using things like water, which is what every one of those includes, in order to create the product that you need, is super innovative. So we think a lot about innovative ingredients and components that are part of the products on the platform while we're building the technology platform and scale underneath that.
We were talking a little bit before about what a relief it is as a consumer to know that you can go to a company that is socially conscious, environmentally friendly, has done that legwork for you, so that when we're purchasing, it takes that effort out of it, and we can know we just trust you because the products and the brands that you're acquiring already have all that going for them, right?
That's right. That's right. You're creating this curation that's really community driven about what people care about, and you're building that in. For us, that's extending all the way to like every one of us want to be a force for good. Like, we all want to do good things. And so how do we do that in every area of our lives, including the types of things we talk about and share?
So let's talk about the most recent round of funding. I know that we published an article about this last week. Do you want to elaborate on any of that for us?
Yeah, so it's super exciting, right? We raised $118 million in equity and debt, and it's really fueling that strategy of our acquisition strategy of like-minded brands and our technology investment. Those are the two areas that it's going. And what it really demonstrates is how important the transformation is that's happening in consumer and the opportunity we have to make a really significant impact in the world.
Well, congratulations.
Thank you.
Round of applause for that. That's really exciting. And we're going to transfer a little bit before we go over to the Women's Tech Council. You are obviously a powerhouse female CEO. Did you run into any issues raising money or this round of funding, or can you share any experience being a woman in such a powerful role?
So this is an interesting question, and I've thought about it often because we all know the stats, right? When, as a female founder and entrepreneur, the stats are just out there that it is harder for you to raise capital. So I'm going to kind of take you back a little bit. A number of years ago, I was raising capital for a company. And I remember having these really distinct conversations with a lot of my mentors who were helping me in that capital raise. And you just know the numbers, right? I get math, right? So I can make those equations. And I remember them saying how many meetings I would have to do in order to raise capital. I actually want to qualify this with one thing. It doesn't matter who you are, raising capital is hard. There's a lot of money flowing in the ecosystem today, but raising money is hard. We should all really believe that that is true. Even though what we mostly see are the announcements, it's a lot of work. You have to have product validation, and you have to do lots and lots of steps. And rejection is just part of that. But I remember when I was raising this capital, and I was a female entrepreneur, and we weren't in the dynamics that we are right now in the market, and it was definitely hard. There were a few times that I remember being like, I'm just not going to answer my email or look at my email till I get to the office, because I'm confident that there will be a series of meetings moving forward and a series of rejections. And even though you know the math, it becomes really personal when you're raising. And for sure, the dynamics were different, right? I had half the chance of my male counterparts at raising money. Now, we successfully raised money even at that time, but the dynamics were different, and it was hard. You had to do a lot of meetings, and you had to find those right partners to really go with it. One of the coolest things about what has happened over the last couple of years is that we are breaking down some of those barriers that existed. And so the opportunity for you to raise capital and to get more access to capital and more partnerships, it's really there. What I think is most important about what just happened with our fundraise is that I think that it means that that barrier will be broken many more times, that there are many more people to follow that will be able to blow through that number, and that we're at the beginning, and what it really does is it's defining a marked change in access to capital for female entrepreneurs. And that's really what the most cool thing about it is. It's not that I raise the capital. It's that it marks a change for the industry. It marks a change for access to capital and what it means for other people, because that's truly how we make a difference in the world. So for me, that's what's so cool about it. And for me, too, in raising these rounds of capital, the things that I know, you have to have great people around you. You have to have great teams. You have to have great access to networks. And you have to find the people who believe in you. And there are great trajectories to making all of those things happen today. And it is a different world than it was even 7 years ago.
That's really exciting. And on that note, let's kind of, like I mentioned, do a little detour over to the Women's Tech Council. You are the co-founder of this. What was your vision for it when you started it? What's happening with it now? And where do you see it going in the future?
That's a great question. And I'm passionate about the Women's Tech Council, too. So I've loved to talk about the Women's Tech Council. The Women's Tech Council is really created around how do we focus on the economic impact of women and really change the trajectory of women in technology. Just as far as stats go, right, in the country, about 50% of the workforce are women. In technology, it's around 25%. And when you get to the executive ranks, it's only 5%. So there's a lot of trajectory. And what you find is that the more women we get in tech, the more diversified we are in our thinking and the applications and the problems that we solve, and even the impact that it has ultimately back to community, because you really do create great products with great diverse teams. So I came through computer science. I was one of 3 graduating women in my computer science program, and I've spent my entire career in tech. And a number of years ago, about 14 years ago, I was sitting with a number of other women, and we said, you know what, we think we can make a difference and increase the number of women in tech by creating a community of women and men that are really focused on how do we change the trajectories and create long-term sustainable programs. And so, because of my computer science background, everything I do is like test and optimize. I can't tell you that I know everything because I don't, but I do know how to say we have a great idea, and we're going to go try it, and we're going to see what works, and we're going to keep pivoting, and we're going to find our way to making the most powerful impact. That's how we created the Women Tech Council. We validated with an audience, we built it, and then we just keep building. And today, we have programs in the high school realm that have had 20,000 high school girls go through. And today, if you look, you actually see the scholarship applications and the Sterling Scholar applications say that the She Tech program is the reason young women are going into STEM. And then you take that all the way through all the other impacts into the boardroom, and that's what's cool, is there's this amazing community, and a community of thousands of women I personally would never have met without it, that is changing networks, it's changing impact, it's changing opportunity, and it's changing what will be available for the future. And I think that's the most important thing that we can do with the time that we have. It's like, how do we use our talents to just do better and make people better?
Awesome. Thanks for sharing that. I'm going to redirect us back to Brandless in the industry that you're in right now. What was it like to re-enter a market that you helped kind of establish, and what's changed?
In the ecosystem of what's happening in consumer, there is so much transformation happening right now. We saw this pre-pandemic, where what was happening in consumer is we were very quickly going to digital and physical integration, but the pandemic accelerated all of that. So it accelerated us to a digital-first world, where we think digital first. Even if you walk into a store, chances are you looked in the digital-first world first. You thought about delivery to home, you thought about pickup, you thought about researching products before you walked in, you did all sorts of things that have really transformed. Pandemic accelerated this. Not only did it accelerate that, but it also accelerated the individual as a platform. So with this technology changes that have happened in iOS, that have happened on Facebook, that have happened in Instagram, they're driving us even more quickly to us as individuals actually becoming the platform for products and consumer. We find out about things because of people we know. We find out about what is a great impact for what we trust, not because of just things we read on a random website or a store that we walked into, but because of an ecosystem of influence around us. That transformation is really for the first time. So you combine the individual and the digital transformation happening, we are at an entirely different stage of what's happening with consumer. And then you add to that this really big drive in all of us to be more aware of what's more important. Like the pandemic taught us that we can step back and decide what our priorities are and what we care about, and we're going to infuse that into decisions that we make. So you combine being able to curate what's mission-driven and really make that part of who you are, along with these transformations in consumer. Like that's what's changed, and that's what we believe we get to capitalize on.
Obviously, the pandemic has impacted so many people, everyone really, business-wise, personally. On that note, what are some other pain points you might be willing to share, maybe lessons learned along your way throughout your career?
One of the things that, as I reflect back on what's happened over the last year, that I think is fundamentally changing all of us, and that it's a really great thing, is the way we have to lead teams. We are in a stage now where I call it empathetic leadership, but I think deeply about how the world has changed in our companies. Today, companies are really it used to be that when you hired people, the employer would kind of say, this is what the structure looks like, this is what I need from you, and this is what you're doing. The dynamic has shifted, right? Where as you are bringing employees in, they have priorities, they have things that they care about, they have an impact that they want to make, and you have to build an ecosystem that embraces what they care about and that brings them along into that mission. And I think that is a massive transformation. Because it's no longer, are you working in the office next to me so that we can talk about things? You have hybrid teams. We had team members that I hadn't met in person until 2 days ago, right, that we've been working with. That's a whole new dynamic. But that also means the way we lead teams is different. And I think that requires all of us to invest in an entire new different type of leadership to align with what matters to people, because what matters to us changed. And when that changes, and then you look at a state like, Silicon Slopes, where our unemployment rate is so incredibly low, there's options. If someone doesn't like what you're doing, and 40% of Americans are considering switching jobs right now, it's a mass amount of people, and there's very disruptive companies. We have to be different leaders in order to build great companies with people who want to work for us. For me, that's one of the biggest changes, and it's a constant reflection about like how well are we doing and how much do we need to evolve to make that, do that even better for the people who work with us.
And there are a lot of growing pains around that for, I would say, most companies right now.
Yep.
What are some steps or maybe some tips that you have as far as how to shift that for anyone that's kind of going through this at the moment?
That's right. We're all in the same boat. Let's be really clear. We're all trying to navigate this. Things that I think are utmost critical. It requires collaboration and communication to totally transform. You have to find ways where you can stay on top of that. I think one of the greatest challenges we face is in the virtual world, it's really hard to read people. Right? So we're on a screen, and then you don't really know how everyone's doing. So we have to invent other ways to be able to see what people need and to be able to understand things that are going on, maybe even outside of their work life that we should be aware of, that in office we might have been aware of, but that we're not now. And so I think that's a big transformation. And I think we have to not just use collaboration and communication tools, but we also have to think about what are those like touch points that let us get that information that we can respond to and make sure that people know that we're building a culture. I think we're all trying to figure out how to build culture in a distributed environment that reflects the values that we have in the ecosystem that we're trying to build. And then you have to be very intentional about when you pull people together. This is a consistent theme we're hearing everywhere. If you're going to have people come into the office, you have to be very focused on everyone's coming because we're doing collaboration, because there are meetings, because we're trying to solve a specific problem. Because if people just come into the office just to work, and some people will still want to just come in the office and work, but when you bring everyone in, you have to do that. And then the other thing you have to solve is the technology challenge. If you have an in-person meeting with a whole bunch of people around a conference table and 2 people remote, and you haven't solved some of the technology challenges of how they see and hear, then they're disconnected from everyone, and it doesn't really facilitate what we're trying to create with collaboration. So we have not all solved all of these problems, but these are the things we're starting to become acutely aware of that we must solve to have high-performing teams. And I think you'll see a whole other transformation in infrastructure of companies over the next year, because we're not going back. We're not going to go back to full-time in the office, especially in technology, and we have to be able to still meet our goals, accomplish, and build great companies together.
That human connection is going to have to be replaced somehow or
Yep.
facilitated in a different manner. So obviously these are huge things to be thinking about in all of our companies. Okay, so let's circle back to Brandless. I know that there are some acquisitions happening. I know that you can't name them at this moment. What are some of the qualities and the brands that you're looking to acquire?
So a big part of our strategy as we create the acceleration for impact is bringing together, we call them like-minded mission-driven brands. So we think about other companies who have products that by coming into the platform accelerate impact. And the cool thing about Brandless too, and it is unapologetically a brand, I should say that. We think about this idea of how do you brand less and live more. And so when we think about companies coming into that platform, we think about those companies that are also trying to accomplish a mission, and that by coming into that ecosystem, expand their impact and allow us to do more good together because they're part of what we're building together.
And so when you bring these new products and companies in, are you rebranding them as Brandless? This is an ironic statement right there, but or are they still going to be able to be differentiated as their own specific products and brands?
Yeah, so maybe a little interesting context. We're on a path where we'll do an acquisition a month. There's a lot of companies coming into the platform very, very quickly. And part of our evaluation criteria is really understanding what makes a brand great. Because a brand, depending on its primary channel, has different parts of it that have made it successful. So it's really important that we keep those brands and those products successful. And so we have an evaluation strategy for how they come into the family. Some of them might rebrand and some of them won't, and they'll just be represented as part of that family. But it is really strategic on the core capabilities that make a product successful and not disrupting the impact that they can make, because we need that collective impact to grow the overall impact of the organization.
Do we have any forecasts as to when you will be announcing to the public which brands are being acquired?
So over time, you're going to see us make lots of announcements about things that are happening in the company and the momentum that it's creating. It's mind-blowing to think that when I started at the beginning of the year, we've now not only closed that round of funding, but we've already closed 3 acquisitions, and we're on a path of 1 a month. It's overwhelming if you just step back and think about it, but it's so cool that we've been able to move that quickly. So we'll talk about what that momentum looks like and how that's shaping up as we go forward, because I also think it demonstrates the opportunities that exist in the market for us to create impactful opportunities.
Cydni, we're clearly in a room full of entrepreneurs that you have their attention, as well as many that are going to be watching this later and listening. Do you have a piece of advice for anyone here or listening as far as being an entrepreneur, a tip for success?
And so I was, thinking a little bit. I always think about this, and don't worry, my advice changes depending on the setting that I'm in. But I was thinking about things that have become really important to me over time. And so I'm going to share with you a quick story which goes to that. A couple of years ago, when we were speaking of fundraising, I was raising capital. And this investor, he flew me down to Beverly Hills, and we walked in this swanky hotel. We go into this boardroom, and he sits at one end, and I sat at the other end of the table. And I really, really, really wanted to deal with him. And we had talked about it internally. We knew what the alternatives were. We had an understanding of the type of arrangement that would have made our company successful. And then he turned to me and he's like, Cyd, what deal do you want from me? Do you want a joint venture? Do you want me to invest in you? Or do you want me to buy you? And at that moment, I paused. And instead of answering with the answer that I knew I wanted, and that was all justified and that we had thought through, I was worried that I might have said the wrong thing in the deal that I wanted that wouldn't have aligned with him. And so I backed off. And I said, well, what do you want? We're okay with any of those. What do you want? And I've often reflected on that one decision to not say what I knew that I needed. Because instead of being able to close a deal at that table while I was sitting there, it delayed the transaction 6 months. We still ended up doing one, but I probably didn't get exactly what I wanted at the moment that I could have closed. So for me, that transformed this idea. I tend to call it the art of the ask, but this idea that you have to be willing to ask for what you need, understanding all the conditions around it, and if they don't play out or they do play out, what that will mean. But you have to be bold enough in those moments to close those deals. And I think of everything as a deal, right? Relationships, when you're bringing people into your company, because they don't know what you want. And if you don't set the stage for what you need, you can't create the value equation for a solution. So this became a mantra. And still sometimes when I go close big deals, I still have to remind myself of this. A couple of years ago, we were doing a deal with a Fortune 10. It was a multi-million-dollar deal. And the team that had constructed the deal before me, it wasn't working. We were not going to make money at the deal. We could no longer create the investments that we had inside of that to make it successful. And it had had a great ROI for that company. And so I remember I was walking into the president of this company's office, and I knew exactly what I needed to have happen, or I was going to have to walk away. And even then, mentally, I'm like, okay, just remember, you are going to ask for exactly what you need, and you're going to tell him what that deal needs to look like for you to be successful. And then we'll come out with a mutually beneficial agreement of what that is. I walk in his office, and we're still really good friends today, and we have this conversation, and we closed that multi-million-dollar deal. And I can guarantee you, had I not been the one who said, this is what it needs to look like, this is what we need to accomplish, these are the objectives that make it successful, we all know that it has worked for you, that we would not have gotten that deal done. And this is true everywhere. So for me, my advice is, learn the art of the ask. Ask for what you want, not just because you're arrogantly asking, but because you know the value it creates for them and the value it creates for you, and that you can successfully get to an outcome that will make it work for all parties. If you ever do deals that don't work for both parties, they will never create the value that you want. You always have to make sure you understand what you need, what someone else needs, and find a solution that makes everyone super successful and accelerates them forward. And sometimes we forget that because we want something too bad or we're afraid of losing something else, but bad deals are never good. And so you have to be really clear, and you have to be just great partners, right? I really believe that our job when you create those is to be really great partners. You want every person you ever do a deal with to want to do a deal with you at every other stage of your career. That any time they would be like, oh my gosh, we loved working with you. Thank you for creating that relationship of value, and let me know how to help you in the future. And so those are all kind of tied together for what I think creates differentiation for us as individuals and entrepreneurs and in the pathways of our careers, because it applies no matter what stage we're at, right? Whether we're closing fundraising, we're closing big sales deals, we're hiring people, we're trying to build partnerships. Your entire career is about people. Your entire career is about those relationships you build. And the better we do that and we understand the value exchange, the greater impact we have in companies and in our personal lives and in the impact we create for communities.
I'm thinking about all the places this can apply in my life, both professionally and personally. And it's so true. You want to have a partnership that is mutually beneficial, because otherwise, if you don't get what you're asking for, it's not going to benefit you in the long run. One last question for us, and then we're going to open it up to the audience here. Moving back over to Brandless, what growth is on the horizon for you guys in the near future, aside from the brands that you're going to soon announce you've been acquiring?
That's right. We are on a very accelerated pathway of growth. When you think about what it means to acquire a company a month, you think about the reach of what that is, the innovation happening inside of the company, and how all of that comes together, it's pretty amazing, that growth trajectory that's on. So you're going to continue to see that, and it's all underway right now, which is probably one of the coolest things, that not only could you take strategy, but you drive it to execution, and then you make that happen fast. That's all part of what we're doing, and so it's just continuing to build, and it's a really fun thing to build with great people.
We're so excited to see what you do. So thank you for joining us today and answering these questions. And we want to open it up to you guys now. We're going to have a microphone that we'll pass around. If you have a question, just go ahead and raise your hand.
Hi, Stephen Finkelstein from Center for Genomic Medicine, and thank you so much for your talk. And I heard you mentioned a few times today about the mentors in your life and the impact that they've made in your career. And I was wondering if you talk about your history and your story about finding those mentors and what it was like to be on that path, and what suggestions you might have to always be looking out for those kinds of influences in your life as you continue through the road.
That's a great question. Because of that statement I made around like how connected our worlds are, what I've definitely learned is that, I've never had one mentor that's mentored me through everything. What I've learned is that I have needed mentors for different things at different moments in my career. And those mentors have come because I've been willing to create relationships with people and just try to help people along the way, even when I didn't need anything from that, but create those relationships so that when sometime in the future I did need help, I could figure out who to call. When I was fundraising, I had previously, been on some executive teams, and it just happened that as I built those networks. So I never looked at it like really intentionally of like, I must create a mentor for this, or I'm going to pursue this. It was much more intentional about creating great relationships where I knew when I needed advice, I could go back to someone. And so I found that when I've changed jobs, I'm like, I've got to call these people and like get their advice on this. Or when I was struggling with a board, I'm like, okay, who do I call that can give me advice on how to handle this? Or when I was raising capital, like who would be willing to jump in because of past relationship? And so they have really mentored me along. I will say very early in my career, one of the CEOs that I came in to work for, he did a phenomenal job of being able to see talent and give me opportunities and an accelerated pathway, and that made a huge difference. That is one thing I often reflect on now, is how do we make sure that we create acceleration for people and give them opportunities fast and see their talent and give them ways to push into the things that they need. But for me, mentorship has not been a diligent mentor as much as it's been diligent networks of people that know that I'm trying to be champions of them. I will help them with things, and then in turn, when I need help, they'll help me.
Sid, first of all, Howard Mitchell with a company called Vital Neuro. Congratulations on being so mission-driven. I have a strategic question, which is, how can you patiently wait for organic growth, people referring other people and sharing what's important to them? I'm sure you have some pressure to promote without having people feel like they're being sold.
Absolutely. I mean, you're building a company, right, where you're driving that value. But I think the way that we think about that, and one of the cool things about Brandless is from the origination of Brandless, there's millions of customers already in the ecosystem. So the fact that you have that you're building off of and that they're aligned with you on mission, the reason customers came to Brandless in the first place was because of the mission. And so then the ability, and what we've really focused on, what are the things that make sure that you're creating value for the customers and you're giving them great product that help them take better care of themselves. So for us, that alignment becomes really key because people are looking for, as you said, curated products that they trust from brands they trust that make them better, because we all still buy stuff. And we are also very diligent about our technology platform, making it easy for that to be possible, so they, as an individual, are a force for good. And you and I both know that you have to be very strategic about your investment in building those platforms for growth, which is what we're doing. And I think we've found a formula that doesn't make it feel like we're putting profits over people, because we're not. Right? We, at the core of it, it's about people. And I'm a firm believer that when you take care of people and they feel like that in your ecosystem, they talk about you, they're loyal to you, and they come back and they help you build your company.
So what percentage would you say is word of mouth sharing versus corporate promotion in terms of sales?
I would say it's definitely a really good mix of both of those across the way. And we also definitely believe, as part of our strategy, that part of that technology acceleration is investing in things that help make the word of mouth easier and not intrusive.
Thank you.
Hi, Cindy. Thank you so much for your time and everything that you share with us. My name is Sophia, and so I'm at a very, very beginning stage of building something big. And so my background is in teaching, and I got an MBA at UVU, but I don't have a background in technology besides my experience in a SaaS company, in a startup. And so what would be your advice for somebody like me that wants to get started with something that can be amazing, but I'm kind of blind, just trying to gather a ton of information, bring in my former experience, and just doing research and all that. So what will be your first, or your advice for me to be successful in just getting started?
So there's so many parts to go into building great companies, but I'm going to focus my answer on product validation, because it's one of the things that is kind of core to how I think about how you build great things. So when you build companies or products, most important thing is that people buy them, right? That you're filling a need, that people need what you are building, and they can understand that, and they understand why they would purchase it from you and that value. Years ago, I got trained by an expert. His name's actually Frank Robinson, and he's referenced in the book Nail It Then Scale It. And he was actually one of my mentors in doing product validation. And I went on the road with Frank, and we did thousands of visits. And what I believe in the product validation space is that you must understand who's going to buy your product, why they're going to buy it, and the business model that will make it successful before you build. And if you do that in the right kind of steps, you'll know that what you build, people will buy it. Because true product validation, I think one of the mistakes people often make is they think about like research and data gathering as validation of product, and it's not. Validation of product is that people get in your pipeline, and they're willing to give you money for what you're building. And if they're not willing to give you money for what you're building, it won't actually come out. So I have this philosophy that says you can never validate with friends and family, because they like you and they lie to you. Like, that's just generally true. They do, right? They're like, okay, yep, that's a great idea. You should totally do that. But they didn't give you their money, so you don't actually know if that's true. So we have this whole methodology that I've always followed in every company I've ever built around what the product does, this ability to show people what it will do, and then tell them what it won't do. The number one thing in product validation is you have to tell people what your product won't do. It's limitations. Because every product has a limitation. You made a trade-off when you designed something to not do something, because you didn't think it was most important. So if you don't tell people what it doesn't do, they can't actually tell you if they'll buy it. That's why people, when you give an idea, say, that's a great idea. And until they know the specifics of how it works and how it doesn't work, then can you ask the questions of procurement and justification. Would you buy it? Why would you buy it? And how much would you pay for it? And so we always go through this model. And when we do it successfully, we build these spreadsheet matrix, because I like lots of spreadsheets. And we actually categorize things like the person that you just talked to, would they buy as is? Would they buy the product that you pitched right now? And if they would, you should have put them in pipeline in that meeting. Like, your job in that meeting was to be like, I think I'm building something that you have a need for. I'm trying to understand how big of a gap was. And if there's a fit, your response to them is like, when I build this, will you be my first customer? Will you try this? Will you commit to be on this? And if they say no, that's a really important sign. And so we always test buy as is and buy could be if. What would I have to change in the product? Am I willing to make that change to get those people into my pipeline? Those two signals, and my magic number is actually 13. In all my validation work, I find if you talk to 13 people who look exactly the same, everything else is standard deviation from that core. But you have to talk to 13 people who look exactly the same. So talking to different people or different roles or different ecosystems where they don't represent what you think is your target customer also gives you false data. Your job is a target customer that you think will buy this, that knows they'll buy that, and if you do it right, you ended up with 13 customers in pipeline that will give you money when you do your product release. So when I think about the most important criteria, it's that you build something people care about. And to build something people care about means that you're very deeply reduce the risk up front, make all the pivots you need before you invest and build.
Thank you so much.
So thank you. I checked out Brandless DTC website. It looks awesome. I think it does a really good job of representing what Brandless is about. You did mention, though, that you guys are omni-channel, so I'm curious, where do you go from the DTC website? Are you looking at certain stores, not looking at certain stores, looking at different e-commerce platforms? Where does Brandless go beyond its DTC?
It's a really important question for the omni-channel side. So we think first about being digitally native, right? In this digital world, being digitally native first. But then we think that the ability to democratize access requires you to be omni-channel. So absolutely that includes Amazon, and it also includes retailers where it makes sense for those products. Because what you want is people to have access to stuff that helps them take better care of themselves and their family and the planet, and you need to make sure that you have product accessible in all sorts of channels. But for us, it's always anchored digitally first.
Any more questions?
Hi, thanks for your time today. You're obviously in a great period of growth in terms of developing your portfolio and adding on new brands and products. At what point do you look at the portfolio and say, okay, maybe we're losing focus, and how do you look at what's in the portfolio and what SKUs are turning and engage in a process of rationalization and realignment?
Yeah, so there's two really interesting things about Brandless, which is at the root of what you're talking about. It can be category agnostic, and you have to create focus for success, right? So I would say that we are in a constant evaluation cycle of making sure that we're aligned. So we've got some core strategies that we look at, and then we take a very data-driven approach to how do you make sure you've created the strongest impact in any one of those given categories. You're building out that portfolio in that. You're watching what's happening in the market, and you're making sure you're very strongly aligned with what makes sense in that category, in that impact, and what the data is telling you about a trajectory of a category or where you need to augment in order to build out that portfolio. But I really believe it's this constant evolution. The thing that makes it most successful is the ability for you to have data and insights that allow you to make better decisions. Almost every day, we're using that data to inform those portfolios, even though we have a core anchor in strategy for us. And we don't think that there are any limitations to what that portfolio becomes. Two most critical things that we are trying to make sure are in the DNA of everything we do are both speed and execution. Because when you bring like-minded brands together, executional excellence is critical. You have to be able to bring those brands in, find synergy, leverage their core competencies that have made them successful, and then create the scale that you need. So being very strong in that operational execution is really critical to the success of what we're doing.
All right, if we have no more questions, thank you so much for joining us today. This has been really incredible.
Thank you for having me. Thank you guys for coming.